I thought it was a good idea to talk to one of the best in the business, and that's Jason Fitzgerald. He, of course, is the founder, and he runs overthecap.com. Jason, welcome to the show. We really appreciate the time. Hope you and everybody in your world are safe and healthy during what's been a real weird year.
Yeah, thanks for having me. We're doing great.
Excellent, Jason. All right, let's start here, and I guess we should get the basics out of the way. Like everyone else, are you expecting the cap to come in at between $180 and $185 million?
Yeah, I think so. We're using the estimate right now just on the low end of 180.5, but it's probably going to split the difference somewhere in there, probably right around 183, somewhere in that range.
Any shot that these TV deals coming down the pike where the NFL could say, all right, we know more money's coming later, so we'll shift some money back, or do you think that's a real long shot at this point?
I think that's a long shot. I mean, they had to know last year that they were probably looking at least one new television contract this year, and even then they were negotiating down in the summer to get a $175 million salary cap floor, which they raised to $180 a couple weeks ago. So I don't think that the league is going to look to do it that way. I think they're just going to kind of play this out and kind of let the chips fall as they may.
You know, Jason, I'm aware that these front offices like to plan 2 and 3 years ahead of time for what's going to happen with the cap, and there was clearly no way to predict that this pandemic was going to happen and there would have to be a dropping of the cap. So the teams were in all likelihood were planning for this 2021 season all the way back in 2018 or 2019. It's a lot bigger adjustment, I think, based on that premise than a lot of other people seem to think. Well, they're only going to lose 10 or 15 million off the cap. I think they got to rip up plans that they were already constructing 2 and 3 years ago, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Everything was done with a salary cap next year, probably between 210 and 215. So to bring it back when the cap hasn't fallen, since 2011. It's kind of a nightmare scenario for a lot of the teams, and it throws your plans out of whack when you look at some of those teams who are really far over the cap this year. This is like devastating for them because they had plans in place that would have been okay if the cap was $20-30 million higher, but when it comes in like this, it really catches you off guard, and you really got to scramble to make things work.
People in the know, Jason, think next week is going to be like the players' equivalent of Black Monday after the season's over, where you're going to see veterans cut left and right. We already had Kyle Van Noy, obviously somebody that was let go, who had a lot of guaranteed money left on his deal, though, as we can discuss, not all guaranteed money is equal, right? But do you expect next week to be really rough for a lot of vets in the league, and what teams should we be keeping an eye on that might have to make some of those moves?
Well, I think it might be towards the end of next week. Teams may hold off until the week after that as well, just waiting to see exactly where the cap is going to come in. It's probably going to be a really tough time, especially because teams have probably set their budgets already, their actual spending budgets, which are probably going to be down this year. But I think if you look around the league and you look at teams like the Saints, you look at teams like the Eagles, Rams, maybe even the Chiefs, Steelers, those are teams who are probably going to have to make moves just to be compliant with the cap. Vikings, Raiders, those bottom teams are the teams that do have cap space are probably monitoring pretty close to look for either trade targets or players that are going to get cut, become street free agents that they can swoop in and sign, before the official start of free agency.
And just so we have the mechanics right, when do you expect that cap number to be finalized? And then at what date and time do teams have to be cap compliant and under that cap?
So they have to be cap compliant on March 17th. I'm going to guess that the cap number will be finalized probably around the 13th of March. I think it's going to be pretty close because I do think they waited for these TV deals to kind of get close to being done so they could get their estimates all in order for the year. So I think it's going to take a little bit of time just because of that. So I think everything's going to be a little delayed.
One of the things that I think is really surprising to me is how the Giants situation with Leonard Williams has still festered. Apparently, there's still a grievance out there about what his tag number should have been this past season. And I need to ask you about this because I know this is your specialty. I don't understand how there could have been a grievance over his cap number this past year under the tag when everybody knows how critical the cap is to the league, and how when you're talking about adjustments that are being made all the way in March of the following year? I don't understand how that happened.
It's just dragged on for a while, and it's kind of a weird one. This has happened a couple of times with franchise players, typically at pass rusher spots, but this has happened a couple of times now with these rookie contracts, with the way that they determine whether you're a defensive end or a defensive tackle. And I don't really know what the hang-up is as to why it's going to take that long, but the decision on this is going to be pretty big for the Giants one way or the other.
Yeah, it is.
If it's the higher number, his franchise tag for this year would jump by a couple $1 million, and they're going to have that adjustment that basically pays back for the extra money that they owe him from last year. So, I mean, that's a pretty big blow to them if it goes against them.
Right, and because there's a carryover of whatever room you had last year, it's going to subtract from that number, right?
Exactly. That's exactly what would happen. So in a sense, it's almost like a $4 million decision versus even just a $2 million one, because you're going to lose that $2 million carryover, and it's going to impact your leverage with him on either another tag or on a extension.
Now, at the same time, I remember there have been players in the past who have been able to say, you know what, let's just settle this and meet in the middle of the two positions with the tag, and let's clean this whole thing up. But apparently, to this point, that hasn't happened.
Yeah, as far as I know, that hasn't happened between the two sides. So you would think at this point that it's not going to happen that way.
Yeah.
So, Jason, just looking at Leonard Williams, obviously you have the defensive tackle market, you have the edge rusher market, but then there are some defensive tackles that almost get treated like edge rushers, right? So if Leonard Williams does reach the free agent market, based on what we've seen in the past, what should the Giants be expecting other teams to be willing to offer him based on what we've seen in the past?
So I think that he's probably going to go up there off the season that he had, and he's going to look for a contract that's similar to DeForest Buckner. You're looking at $20 to $21 million a season for someone like that. So I think it's going to be a pretty pricey contract. He was able to pressure the quarterback a lot this year, and that's what people look for. And, it's the perfect timing for him. He's a high draft pick. Pretty much checks all the boxes off that you want when you're looking for someone that's going to really hit a home run in free agency.
At the same time, Jason, and this is kind of a follow-up, and you can address it with Leonard specifically, but also generally, being on a one-year franchise tag this year, probably not the worst thing in the world, right? Because next year's market with the cap, I imagine it'll probably accelerate back up over $200 million next year, right? I imagine would be your expectation. So all these teams are going to be flush with money in cap space. So I got to imagine next year's market's going to be one that players would want to be a free agent in, right?
Yeah, I think so. I think if you're a high-end player, this year will be fine for you. But, yeah, for all those players who are kind of like a mid-tier free agent or, someone that would be under maybe $13 million a year even, those players are going to have a chance to probably reap a lot more rewards as you wait until 2022 or even 2023, just because the money is going to be so much more at that point in time.
So you're on board with the premise that many of the second-level or medium-range free agents are likely to take one-year deals?
Yeah, I think that could happen. I think depending on the money that's out there that's going to be offered, I think there might be a logical reason for a lot of players to take a one-year contract and kind of have their eyes set on next year, where the prize might be a lot bigger than what's going to be available this offseason.
Jason, how long do you think it will take for some of those second, third, even below that tier free agents to sign? We saw, for example, last year it took Logan Ryan till August to sign up with the Giants. Is that what we're going to see this year now, since these guys are not going to maybe land those big long-term contracts they wanted? And there's a good chance the entire offseason program is going to be virtual. Do you think we're going to see a lot of these vets go into the summer, or no?
I think it depends on the veterans. If you do have players that believe they're worth a lot more than what might be offered in free agency, yeah, you're going to see those players go into the summer. Ryan last year, Everson Griffin, Gerald McCoy, I think went long. A bunch of different players, Jadeveon Clowney. So you might see some stuff that will happen like that again. I think the players are pushing for more virtual workouts kind of in the off season, and I think that's a possibility as well that you might see from teams this year. I mean, you do have the ongoing COVID stuff, even though the restrictions are starting to lighten a little bit. But that might also be a little point where the NFL can concede with the union on some of the financial aspects of things by, kind of going to the virtual workout program again.
Jason, let me backtrack to Leonard Williams for just a minute. And we talked about, obviously, the kind of numbers that last year's production might draw. But at the same time, and you've studied the financial implications and the economic climate of what the league has done over the course of several years. There are those, the naysayers and the skeptics, who say, well, you know what? Leonard Williams had that one terrific year when he came out with the Jets originally, but then he's been very pedestrian and now had this career year with the Giants in what he knew was a contract year because it was a tag year. And that, there's no way to even think about him coming up with double-digit sacks again moving forward. Do you get the impression, based on how people open their purse strings, or for that matter, keep them closed, that there will be a highly competitive market for Williams, even though his production off of 2020 makes him a premier free agent?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think there's definitely teams that are going to see him with red flags. They're going to look to see that, even when the Giants traded for him, they traded, a 3 and a 5, I think, for him. So it's not like the market was incredibly hot for him 2 years ago, to get their hands on him. But, when it comes to free agency and it comes to teams that are willing to take risks or that they need to make a big splash, those couple of teams that have a lot of cap room or can create it, I think they'll probably bid against themselves and kind of create that market. We've seen that before with questionable players. Like, I know a lot of people were asking about the Raiders tackle, Trent Brown, who's supposedly on the trade block. That was very similar to what happened to him. Very questionable talent a couple of years ago, scores the biggest contract in the history of the NFL for an offensive tackle at that point in time. Even though the market might not have been that hot for him overall, all it took was 2 or 3 teams to be involved to get him to that level.
We talked about the market for Leonard Williams. How about Dalvin Tomlinson? He's a guy that obviously has been the model of consistency, has never missed a game. Not a big sack guy, but really good against the run. Correct me if you think I'm wrong on this. I don't think the defensive tackle free agent class is really great, and the draft class isn't supposed to be great. So, Jason, what type of competition do you think the Giants will face for a guy like Tomlinson who doesn't wow with the sack numbers?
Yeah, he'll probably do pretty well for himself. I think we have him as the number 2 defensive tackle who's a free agent this year. So he should do pretty well. Most of the players like him have done well for themselves in free agency. They usually will end up on a contract anywhere from probably $12 to $14 million a season. I think I had him pegged at around $13.5 million a year. I think that's fair for someone who's a pretty good run defender. He plays all the time. He's on the field a lot, which you can't say for a lot of defensive tackles. A lot of teams will use really rotational guys. So I think if you look at some of these recent players who have gone into free agency, and signed contracts, I'm pretty sure that's where his market will probably wind up.
All right, so realistically, Jason, given the market that we think Williams is going to have and Tomlinson's going to have, I've been telling people that there are lots of different ways that you can trick the contract structure. We all know about the bonus money. Then there's the signing bonus, the roster bonus, the incentives. There are a lot of different bonuses and triggers that can spread out the money differently. I'm suggesting potentially voidable years on the back of Tomlinson's contract might be a way if you give him the low ball money early, and by using the voidables on the back end, that might be a realistic way to get him and Williams in at market value to stay here this fall. How realistic is that?
Yeah, I think you're going to see teams will do that. You'll see returns of things like option bonuses, and they'll do stuff just like that, what you're suggesting. They'll throw a void year or two in at the end of the deal to be able to get that maximum proration on the signing bonuses and, get these guys in there. And, yeah, for the Giants cap situation, if they want to get both guys in, that's probably what you're going to have to do. You're going to have to find ways to get those numbers low for this year and then, let them rise accordingly as time goes on.
Realistically, Jason, and again, obviously, we don't know how the Giants are going to try to structure this, and the players have to agree to these contracts too, obviously. How low do you think they could realistically get those first-year cap numbers down to, even by using, some of these tricks and, maybe, prorating the bonus and all those sorts of things? I mean, you probably are still looking at a decent amount of cap space you're going to have to clear to get both, right?
I don't know. You could probably get on contracts that big. I mean, I'd have to sit there and fool around with the numbers a little bit.
Yeah, ballpark it.
But I bet you could get those guys in for a combined total maybe of $13 million, $14 million.
Wow. Okay.
Between the two of them, somewhere in that ballpark.
Yeah, and that's really the point. I think a lot of people have been scared off thinking it's impossible to do, but the more I've been thinking about it, Jason, and I do think that these triggers are going to make it possible for them, but of course, as we know, the players also have to cooperate, and that's a big part of it. It does sound like both guys do want to come back. All right, if I were to say to you that we know what the Giants' primary holes are, we've talked about it on this program many times, cornerback 2, edge rusher, big play wide receiver or tight end, obviously a skill position, big play impact guy. If you were dealing with their cap space, and it's going to dwindle if those two guys come back, where would you put your one decent money free agent signing on, understanding you can also fill up holes in the draft in another month or two?
I think this year, if you wanted to go for a big player, I think the position that you would look at is your pass rusher. There's a lot of guys who are going to be available this year, a lot of really good talent. I think that the return on those players is probably going to be a little bit better than maybe gambling sometimes on the big name wide receiver. I think there's some decent depth at wide receiver as well if you want to look for a lower cost guy that you can find. And cornerback is not a great position in free agency this year, so you're pretty much just going to be looking at, your slot corner types who aren't usually that expensive anyway. So I think if you're looking to hit the home run, you're going to look at the pass rushers this year.
All right, final question for me, Jason. We are heading down the pike here just, I think, 5 days next Tuesday, so that's, I guess, about 6 days until we have the deadline for the franchise tags to go on these players. We haven't seen many thrown on yet. Do you think we're going to see more, fewer, based on the cap situation and teams trying to get on the cap? How do you think these franchise tags are going to play out? Who do you think are the guys that are most likely to get tagged before the deadline hits on the 9th?
Well, I think it's going to depend on the team situations. I think if you're playing running back, if you're Aaron Jones in Green Bay, the tag numbers are going to be so low that those kind of players are going to get tagged. The more questionable ones are going to be like the guys coming off a big salary this year because they calculate the tags different for those players. Leonard Williams, for example, Dak Prescott, Shaq Barrett, Allen Robinson. Those numbers are going to be so much higher that I'm not sure if those players will get tagged. And I think that's a reason for the wait. I think you want to do everything in your power to extend these players so you can get them on the low cap number that we just kind of talked about, rather than having a franchise tag someone for $20 million, which probably ruins all free agency, if you're carrying someone at that high of a number. You're probably going to see players like a Chris Godwin are probably going to get tagged. They probably won't be available. Kenny Golladay maybe. I think those types of players will probably get tagged this year. But I think teams are going to wait until the last possible minute to place those tags on the players.
And, Jason, final one for me. Philadelphia, obviously, they had to bite off a big chunk of dead money with what they did with Carson Wentz. We don't know how the Prescott thing is going to resolve itself. If you were looking at the NFC East and understanding some of the machinations that may still happen over the course of the next week or so, how do you size up the cap climate in the Giants division?
Washington probably has the best position right now of everybody, though they have a couple of guys, I think, on their defensive line that are probably going to be looking for extensions. Giants are probably second when it comes to the cap, and then you got Dallas. And Philadelphia is probably just going to have to take like a timeout this year and get everything back in order. That's probably how it's going to work out with the teams. I think the Giants are in a good position moving forward if the quarterback works out this year. If Daniel Jones is able to take that big kind of jump the way like a Josh Allen did in Buffalo this year. And he doesn't have to be as good as Josh Allen. Just more consistency, less turnovers, that kind of stuff. I think the Giants are in a pretty good position, with some of the pieces they have on the roster and the way things kind of look in the future to, probably be in decent shape. But, if they have to go back and get themselves another quarterback, that's almost like doing another restart, 2 years from now, if you're looking in the draft or if you're looking, at free agency for the journeyman Ryan Fitzpatrick type players.
Jason, and just to back up your point here, I was scrolling through your year-by-year contracts on Over the Cap, and for the folks that don't know, you can look at the team's future cap situation from year to year. You look at your, dead money and cap savings column, besides the guys on rookie deals after this year, there's very little dead money hanging around on any players on the Giants roster. So they've handled these contracts pretty well the last couple of years to set themselves up, right?
Yeah, they've done fine. I think with this stuff, they had that spurt where they really kind of got off track a couple of years ago when you
2016.
The Janoris Jenkins, all that stuff, and I'm sure they regret the Odell Beckham deal that they did for whatever reasons that they ended up doing that one. But otherwise, I think they've been okay with the stuff. I thought they had a really good run in free agency last year. I thought those were reasonable contracts that they signed. I thought pretty good structures on most of the players. And, they worked out. The guys played well last year, and sometimes that's all you can ask for.
Jason, awesome stuff. Great information. Welcome to the Big Blue Kickoff Live family. Thank you so much. Let's talk again soon and enjoy what's sure to be a chaotic next couple of weeks.
Appreciate the time. Stay well.
Thanks, guys.